Hi, I'm Emmy, your teacher and mental health guide for your online training. In this class, we are going to talk about empathy and compassion and why these capabilities are the key to helping you provide better support to your students as a yoga teacher. So let's start this off by talking about our main psychology concepts for this class. So first, what is empathy? Empathy is the ability to interpret, understand, and feel other people's pain as if it were our own, which motivates us to respond with compassionate behavior. Empathy is actually a very complex capability because it's influenced by neurobiological, social, emotional, cognitive, and behavioral, and even moral factors, and also our previous experiences. And there are actually different types of empathy, which is where we're going to zoom in for a moment, because it's important to understand the different types of empathy, as this will allow you to identify how you experience empathy, which will in turn allow you to connect with it and or strengthening it in a healthy manner. So the first type is emotional empathy. It refers to the ability to understand another person's emotions, feeling concerned for their well being, feeling the same emotion, and responding to that emotion. The main characteristic of this type of empathy is that it can show up accompanied with feelings of personal emotional distress. The second type of empathy is somatic empathy, which involves a physical response when reacting to what another person is experiencing. So, the main characteristic is that this type of empathy is accompanied by a strong physical sensation or sensations that mimic how the other person is feeling. So, if the other person is feeling anxiety and we have a very strong somatic empathy, we may feel the same physical sensations that accompany anxiety, that the anxiety that the other person is feeling. And the third and last type of empathy is cognitive empathy, which means being able to understand another person's mental and emotional state and how they're processing their situation. What stands out here is that the focus is more on what the other person might be thinking and following that thought process, and that's how we come to understand what they're feeling. Knowing the different types of empathy, take a moment to reflect on the one that resonates the most with you. Is it easier for you to understand what someone is feeling based on the emotions that you perceive or that you identify in that person? Meaning, is it easier for you to identify emotions and feelings? And are you more attuned to someone's energy and can easily sense that difference in their feelings? Or is it maybe easier for you to understand how someone is feeling because when you listen to what is going on with that person, you feel it so strongly physically that it helps you identify what that person is feeling and then be empathetic with their situation? Or maybe it's easier for you to put yourself in another person's shoes mentally and follow their train of thought. And that's how you deduce how they're feeling and feel bad for them and want to help them. Which of this that I've mentioned resonates with you the most? The first, the second, or the third situation? Okay, having that knowledge nugget, let's zoom out again and move on to our next main concept, compassion. What is compassion? Compassion is a tender response in reaction to another person's suffering. It belongs to the same process as empathy, but it is a response part of the process that allows us to move past identifying how the other person is feeling to wanting to do something to help them to acting to relieve their suffering. So, what is the difference between empathy and compassion? Well, the main difference between empathy and compassion is that compassion involves feeling another person's pain as if it were your own, but it doesn't necessarily include a willingness and or action to help the other person. Empathy does motivate us to act with compassionate behavior, but it doesn't mean that we always do. I also want to give a little light to the concept of sympathy because I know that empathy, compassion, and sympathy are usually used as synonyms, though they mean very different things. So to avoid confusion, let us clear up what sympathy is. Sympathy is feeling concern, pity, or sadness for another person, for their situation or misfortune, and wishing them happiness and well-being. So now that we've touched upon the theory behind our main concepts, you may look something like this. It's time to bring those concepts down to earth to help us gain a better grasp on them. How exactly do we differentiate between empathy, compassion, and sympathy in real life? You can use this little table that I've included as a reference because we are going to play a game. I'm going to give you a few examples, 3 to be exact, of situations, and you have to guess if it reflects empathy, compassion, or sympathy. So maybe pause here to read the little tables carefully. Maybe take a picture if you want, but I promise that between the examples, the situations that I'm going to throw at you, I'm going to put this back up so you can read it. Okay? But just prepare yourself mentally, maybe grab a cup of coffee, and let's start. So let's say, first situation, let's say that in one of your classes there is a student who really struggles with arm balances, and you see them class after class struggling to get into the pose. And they even mention to you that they feel like they're not strong enough to do arm balances yet. So in response, you show up to your next class and you give them a little piece of paper with some drills and some modifications written down so that they can practice at home. Also, of course, practice in class, get stronger, and then advance towards arm balances. So is this an example of empathy, of compassion, or of sympathy? Take your time to think. You can even pause the video if you want. I told you I will put the little table here. And write down the answers somewhere. I'll let you know the answers at the end. So write down what you think is the correct answer somewhere, and let's move on to the next situation. Second situation. A student comes up to you after class, and you notice that they have tears in their eyes. So you stop to check in with them. And you, of course, ask if they're all right. In response, they share that they've just recently lost someone that was close to them, and that the class they had today made them emotional, made them feel vulnerable, and just brought those feelings to the surface. So as you listen to their story, you feel overwhelming sadness about their situation, and you thank them sincerely for sharing, and then you just let them go home, right? What do you think this situation reflects? Is it empathy? Is it compassion? Or is it sympathy? Write your answer down, remember. Okay, last situation. You're chatting with a fellow teacher, and they're sharing an embarrassing experience for them. They're telling you a story about the time that they mixed up the flow that they were teaching, and they got very flustered, and then they turned bright red. And as they share this, you feel yourself blush intensely, and you say, "Oh my God, I understand why you got flustered. I would feel so embarrassed by that too." What do you think the situation reflects? Is it empathy? Is it compassion? Or is it sympathy? And write it down somewhere. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of extra seconds to revise your answers because we're going to reveal the correct answers in 3, 2, 1. Ready or not? Time for the real answers. So first situation. The first situation reflects compassion. Why? Because the focus here is on the action that will relieve that person's suffering or discomfort or just uncomfortable feelings because they are struggling. Now, second situation. Is it empathy? Is it compassion? Is it sympathy? And the correct answer is sympathy. Why? Because here the focus really is on the reaction that you, hypothetically you, had when listening to this student's suffering. That, of course, leaves our third situation, which reflects You guessed it, empathy. Why? Because you listened to your fellow teacher, you felt equally embarrassed, you understood that person, you were like, oh my god, I understand. I would feel that same way. You felt that same way, you blushed even, and you had a physical reaction. So that means somatic empathy. Let me know in the comment section below the video if you guessed correctly. Okay, now that we've covered our main concepts and hopefully understand them a little better, let's dive deeper into why we're talking about the importance of empathy and compassion in your online training. Why does it make sense? Why is it important for your teachers to know how to be empathetic? Because it helps keep your ego in check. Ego, when we talk about ego, we're not referring to our true self. We're talking about a false image of ourselves that doesn't allow mistakes or flaws or being different from the norm. It interferes with empathy because it doesn't allow us to adopt other perspectives. It keeps us centered in ourselves and what we should be. And this makes it harder for us to relate with someone else and understand why they may feel or react in a certain way. Ego in a yoga teacher doesn't allow connection with their students. It doesn't allow you to see your students for who they are and vice versa. And that is why empathy is key here. When empathy comes into the picture, we are able to overcome differences between ourselves and others, create connections, and have the opportunity to act upon those connections. So think of empathy as the secret ingredient that gives you the ability to identify your students' needs and your students' wants, and what allows you to inspire commitment in your students. Because when students see how much you care, how you connect with them, and how much you make that effort to understand them, and how you continuously show up for them, that motivates them to continuously show up too. Let's tackle that same question for compassion. Why is compassion so important for yoga teachers? Because it helps you reconnect with your purpose for teaching. You've probably heard many times how important it is for you to reconnect with your why and think about your why and figure out your why. But it's not often that you are actually given a way to do that. And a tool that can help you connect with your why is compassion, because compassion involves recognizing our shared humanity. We not only identify with what the other person is feeling through compassion, we also want to do something to help them. Part of that motivation is because we probably resonate with what that person is going through, right? We have experienced that same feeling, maybe not that same situation, but that same feeling. We have felt those same emotions. I read somewhere that compassion allows the gifts of the spirit to work within you. And I believe that for yoga teachers, what this means is being compassionate is not only tuning into the talents within you, but it is also finding ways to share those talents through yoga in service to others. Showing compassion to your students by offering them guidance and reassurance, and listening actively and teaching them different asanas and kriyas and mantras and breathing exercises, all of those things help relieve that person's suffering, helps them find balance, helps improve their lives in a very powerful way. Before moving on to the practical part of our class, I want to talk a bit about the struggles that some people may face when it comes to empathy. When you feel like this, that like this gift. There are different reasons why people may struggle with being empathetic. Neurodivergent people, for example, meaning people who think, feel, process, and behave differently than what is considered typical, can have a hard time with empathy. So, if you are neurodivergent, you may have a harder time recognizing and interpreting how other people feel based on their body language, their facial expressions. You may also have a harder time following their train of thought and mentally putting yourself in their shoes. However, something else that may happen is that your emotional empathy is higher. Your cognitive empathy may not be your forte, but emotional empathy, that can be it. Meaning that you can have strong emotional responses to other people's feelings, so much so that they can even maybe overwhelm you sometimes. So it's not that you don't feel empathy, it's just that you may have a harder time with cognitive empathy, than emotional empathy, or maybe even somatic empathy. And it may not be what typically comes to mind when you think about empathy, which is why some people think that neurodivergent people don't have as much empathy, which is not true. Another struggle that may happen when it comes to empathy is that when we are emotionally overloaded, overstimulated, or overwhelmed, when we're burned out, our capacity to feel empathy actually declines because it is too much emotional labor. Being empathetic requires more energy in the situations that we have to expend. And this can also apply to neurodivergent people who may quickly get overwhelmed or burned out when dealing with certain emotions or strong emotions or some emotions for a long period of time. We may also struggle with empathy when we have too much of it. When you are overly concerned about other people's well being and their happiness at the expense of your own, or when you are repeatedly exposed to stressful or traumatic events, you can quickly find yourself with empathy fatigue or adrenal fatigue. And we're going to talk about this specifically in one of our later classes, but just know that that is one of the struggles that we can have with empathy. While it is important to recognize if you struggle with being empathetic and are compassionate, by no means is it the end of the road. Both empathy and compassion, as we've learned here, are learned skills that can be cultivated and that can be strengthened with time and with practice. So, for the practical part of our class, we are going to quickly go over 2 exercises. The first one is a 3-step exercise that is going to help you strengthen your ability to be empathetic. So follow through the steps that we're going to go through mindfully. Repeat this exercise as many times as you wish. You can even pause as we go through each step to complete your workbook as we go. And with time and practice, you will be able to go through each of these steps automatically in your mind, which will allow you to be more supportive when it comes to your students. Okay, so step number 1 is connect. The first step to cultivating empathy in your relationship with a student is to build a bridge to connect to them. And a great way to do that is to establish open communication based on respect, honesty, and healthy boundaries. Reflect on the following questions to guide the way that you can connect with your students in order to empathize with them. So first, when speaking with your student, are you fully tuned in to what they're saying and what they're not saying? Are you paying attention to the way in which they hold themselves and behave? If your student's body language is not clear to you, are you expressing curiosity and asking questions to help clarify what they're feeling? Before you respond to a student, ask yourself, what values and feelings do I wish to convey with my words? And it can be that you want to express understanding or grace or sympathy or whatever you want. But when you ask yourself this question, this will guide the words that you choose and the way that you speak. When thinking about the last conversation that you had with your student, what do you think your questions and responses convey to them? And you can feel free to ask the opinion of someone that you trust if you're not sure of the answer. But I think that it's important to see your previous interactions to maybe see what you can work on or where you feel that you need to work on and how to support yourself in improving that. And last but not least, when thinking about the last conversation that you had with your student, did you leave the conversation having a better understanding of their perspective or feeling like you had a better understanding of their perspective? Now, step number 2 is embrace the differences. So the next step can be the most uncomfortable one because it involves recognizing the differences between the student that you have in front of you and yourself. Empathy must cross barriers, but for that to happen, we must first acknowledge that there are differences that exist, like heritage, religion, gender, beliefs, race, etc. And think about the following questions to make room for empathy and acceptance in your relationship with your students. Are you willing to engage in this conversation or interaction with your student with an open mind and heart? Are there any preconceived assumptions that are bubbling up for you that need to be acknowledged and mindfully let go? How are you creating a warm, respectful, open environment to engage with the student? Are you willing to sit in the discomfort that these differences between you and your student create and commit to arriving to a compromise that supports both you and your student? And finally, what words, actions, body language, and attitude can you express that will help break down any barriers between you and your student? Now, step number 3 is bring awareness to your next steps. The third and final step is all about making a lasting difference. After you've created a connection, after you have had these meaningful conversations and you have embraced the differences, the next steps that you take to keep cultivating empathy in your relationship with your student is very important. And you can use the following questions to inspire you to keep being consistent with demonstrating empathy with your students. What is another way to improve your overall relationship with all of your students? What is another way that you can support your students individually? How can you keep the conversations going to check in with your students? And what other ways can you find to maintain an empathetic environment as a teacher? And finally, our last exercise for this class is dedicated to helping you cultivate more compassion towards yourself and others. So this is a guided meditation that I have adapted that was originally created by Dr. Helen Wang. When I learned about this meditation, I immediately thought that it would be the perfect exercise to give you. So I invite you to leave your notebook to the side and join me for a short meditation. Before we start, if you want to change your position, maybe go to somewhere more comfortable or take a sip of water, take advantage and do so right now. And we'll start in a moment. Before we start, I know that sometimes we may feel comfortable meditating with our eyes closed, but for me, for example, it's not as comfortable. So I have selected a short video that can accompany you throughout this meditation. And this little bubble is going to disappear so you can focus on this in peace. And then I'm going to come back when we wrap up the class. Let's begin. Settle back into a comfortable position. Once you find that comfortable seat, take a deep breath. Inhale. Exhale. You can roll your shoulders in circles a couple of times to the front and keep breathing deeply. Now roll your shoulders to the back. And for a few moments, let's focus on your breath and clear your mind of worries. Now settle back into stillness and keep breathing. Pay attention each time that you inhale and exhale, and let yourself experience and be aware of the sensations of breathing. If it feels right to you, allow your eyes to fall closed. Keep breathing deeply. Let your tongue fall from the roof of your mouth and release the tension in your jaw. You are safe. Everything is okay. Allow yourself to take a step back from your worries just for now. And take a deep breath. Breathe in. And let it out. Bring attention to your mind's eye and picture someone in your life. It can be a fellow teacher, it can be a student, it can be a friend, it can even be you. whoever that person is, allow yourself to feel love for them, to let that love bubble up inside you, and notice how this love feels in your heart. Perhaps you feel a sensation of warmth, openness, and tenderness. Whatever it is, focus on that feeling. Continue breathing deeply. Breathe in. And as you breathe out, imagine that you are extending a golden light that holds your warm feelings from the center of your heart. Imagine that the golden light reaches out to the person that you're focusing on, bringing them peace and happiness. And as this golden light goes out from your heart and bathes that person in light, repeat after me. May you have happiness. May you be free from suffering. May you experience joy and ease. Say it once again. It can be in your mind or out loud. May you have happiness. May you be free from suffering. May you experience joy and ease. And keep breathing. And repeat the words once more, feeling and meaning each word with kindness. May you have happiness. May you be free from suffering. And may you experience joy and ease. Breathe in. And breathe out. And again, breathe in. Keep breathing, and let's breathe together. Breathe in. Breathe out. Breathe in. And breathe out. And again, breathe in. And as you breathe out, let the image of that person begin to disappear and float away. Focus once more on your breathing, on how your body is feeling. Maybe begin to wiggle your toes or your fingers. Slowly start to stretch your legs and stretch your arms. And feel that deep stretch, that nice sensation flowing through your body. Let's breathe in deeply and allow yourself to fill up with joy and gratitude. And breathe out and allow yourself to feel peace. Begin to open your eyes and enjoy the last couple of deep breaths together. Inhale. Exhale. And one final time together. Inhale. And exhale. Thank you so much for joining me on this meditation. As you become more comfortable and experienced, you can extend this practice towards new students, acquaintances, people you don't know that much, and even those you don't particularly resonate with. Remember that compassion is a skill, and it's okay if it takes time and practice to strengthen it. That's it for this class. I hope that this class has helped you understand what is the key behind being a supportive teacher Remember to download the workbook for this class as it will help you put these exercises into practice. And I will see you in our next class.